Yet joining us now for more on this, I'm joined by International Correspondent Afua Hagan for News Central. Afua, good morning. Thank you for, rather good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Do tell us what we should know about the Pope's death.
Not too many details yet. Hospital sources said a few minutes ago that the Pope passed away peacefully. We don't know if that was at his papal apartments or in hospital, but they have told us that he passed peacefully at 7:35 a.m. this morning. That's when we got that statement that said at 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and the Church. Now, that announcement was made by Cardinal Kevin Farrell in that statement from the Vatican. Now, the Pope had a pretty busy Easter period. On Monday, Thursday, he visited a prison in Rome for 30 minutes. On Holy Saturday, he visited St. Peter's Basilica in the evening. And on Sunday, he delighted the faithful just yesterday, Easter Sunday, by appearing on that balcony at St. Peter's Basilica. Now, he gave the blessing to the city of Rome and to the world. He did say, "Happy Easter, brothers and sisters," and he managed to say that without the nasal cannula that we have seen him with in recent weeks. It has helped him with his breathing. An aide read out the full address that he would usually give on Easter Sunday. But he did delight crowds by being there, by making his presence felt at St. Peter's Basilica. And it's thought the last sort of engagement that he did, so to speak, was a private meeting with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. And then he made a statement again, on his thoughts on peace in Palestine, in Gaza. He was a pope that called churches in Gaza every single day, and even when he was in hospital, and he was able to do that to check on his priests there. And we also know that tonight there's going to be a rosary held in St. Peter's Square at 6:30 p.m. local time. That will take place this evening.
It's a very weird kind of Easter weekend this weekend. I mean, it's a ritual, his Easter address. But so if you could tell us what has been the reaction from, Rome and also Roman Catholics across the world.
Well, in Rome and St. Peter's Square particularly, we've had the bells tolling this morning. You have lots of people gathering in that area to pay their respects and to mourn the passing of the Pope. You've got lots of reaction from world leaders. King Charles III has said that himself and his wife, Queen Camilla, were most deeply saddened to learn of the Pope's death. But the King was saying that he was glad that Pope Francis was able to share an Easter greeting with the Church on Sunday, a day before his death. The King and Queen also said they were greatly moved to have been able to visit Pope Francis just days before his death in that state visit where they celebrated their 20th anniversary. Now, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer also paid tribute, saying his leadership in a complex and challenging time for the world and the Church was often courageous. It always came from a place of a deep humility. We've heard from the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who said in a national televised address that all flags would fly at half-mast at government buildings through Tuesdays as a sign of respect for the late pontiff. He said for Australian Catholics, he was a devoted champion and a loving father. The Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said Pope Francis was a pioneer of interfaith harmony, peace, and the promotion of humanity. The Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, paid tribute to the Pope on X, calling him a good, warm, and sensitive man. US President Donald Trump paying his respects on X as well. And we've had lots and lots of reaction coming in from the French President, Emmanuel Macron, Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Frederick Merz, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. But all these tributes having this similar theme, praising his ability to be able to talk about war, famine, poverty, how incredibly important that was to him, that his life of service, his life of faith, his compassion, all these qualities that Pope Francis had really coming through in the tributes from world leaders, and leading to thousands of the faithful who will now be in St. Peter's Basilica, and particularly, of course, for that rosary, like I said, is taking place at 6:30 p.m. this evening local time.
Okay, I would just like the viewers to know that what you're looking at are live pictures from the Vatican just there, as the Catholics mourn the Pope after his passing from just today. Once again, these are live pictures and videos from the Vatican. Afua, I'm going to put you to the side for just a second because we're being joined by Rev'd Father George Odafe in Kaduna, Catholic priest in Kaduna here. Rev'd Father George Odafe, you're welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Grand. So I'd like to know, how is the Nigerian Catholic community taking the news of the Pope's death?
The Nigerian is taking it in pains. It is not easy to lose such a charismatic leader that he was. So as it is, we are in a period of mourning and praying and hoping that in the end, a good leader will be elected to replace him. So it is in great sorrow. We are mourning at the moment.
For many, the question has always been, when will Africa have a representative or an African pontiff? When will one emerge? Is this too soon to ask, or is it something that is a relevant question, one might ask?
It is a relevant question to ask because when the cardinals meet at the conclave to elect a new pope, anyone can be elected. It is the work of the Holy Spirit that guides and directs them in the election of pope. So it is possible that an African, one from sub-Saharan Africa, can be elected pope at the moment. But we have had in the past Africans as pope, but predominantly from what we now call the northern part of Africa. So sure, a pope can be elected from the conclave. We hope that will begin in 15-20 days' time.
Okay. And what about the legacy of Pope Francis? What will the legacy of Pope Francis be?
First of all, his care for the environment. It informs the reason why he chose the name Francis, following after the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi, who was a man that lived a humble life, quiet life, was more interested in the spread of the gospel, and above all, care for the environment. So that alone is something that the Pope will be remembered for. Also, another important aspect of his legacy is the openness of the church to all hands being involved in the management of the church. In fact, his papacy introduced more women into key roles in the management of key offices that are in the Vatican. So for these two, the Pope will be greatly remembered among many, especially for his humility. Mm-hmm. And in fact, before he died, he asked that his funeral should be that of a pastor and a disciple of Christ, not that of an ex-pedostic.
Mm-hmm. And Afua, back to you regarding the Pope's legacy. I'm wondering whether there are any political nuances that might be also included in there.
This will be remembered as the Pope who really decentralized the Catholic Church from Europe. You know, he was the first Pope from the global south, and he really grew populations of Catholics across Africa as well as Central and South America. And that will absolutely be part of his legacy, as well as being a Pope of mercy and inclusion. You know, he wanted everybody to be able to come to Jesus, whether they were part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether they were women, whether they were poor. You know, he always talked about remembering the poor. He talked about environmentalism as something that the church really had to look into. And climate justice and social advocacy were things that were really, really, really important to him, and work that he tried to do throughout his papacy. He was divisive, but he was also a visionary as well. And so I think he will be remembered in these ways also, and definitely that will be part of his legacy.
Well, Afua Hagan, Father George, thank you very much for being a part of our session this afternoon. Thank you.